The wall had been blue once in the morning, John remembered, when the sun found angles along the ice and poured pale fire into the frozen veins. This morning it was the color. John stood another heartbeat, feeling the weight of the day on him like a second cloak, then made his way to the stair with Ghost at his heels. The descent bit into him. Each step had been cut by generations of brothers long dead, and every heel had smoothed the ice by a breath until the steps ran like glass. He might have gone faster if he kept a hand on the rope, but he preferred to go as he had the first time he climbed them, with nothing to catch him if he slipped. The wall took what it wished. His respect was all he had to offer it. By the time he reached the yard, the first of Tormund's people were stamping in beyond the gate. The old machinery screamed as it opened. The huge timbers were white with rime, and roped spears of ice had grown under the lintel like a row of teeth. Through those teeth they came. Fur shirts stiff with frost, bone-tipped spears, round shields painted with crude suns, antler crowns, a boy leading a goat whose beard was clotted with snow, women with knives on their belts and children riding the sledges bundled to the eyes. And in the midst of them, riding as if the world were his sled and the rest of them only hanging on, came Tormund Giantsbane, his beard bejeweled with white, his chest bare except for the pelt of some striped beast thrown over one shoulder. "Snow!" he bellowed the moment he saw John, and the name echoed off the icicled stones. "There you are, Crow. I thought you might be hiding in some warm woman's bed, hugging her like a flask." "I've no such luck," John said. He kept his voice even, for the men at his back and the watchers peering from the armory, for Bowen Marsh near the steps with his lips pursed tight and his eyes sharper than his soft face suggested. "You brought them," Tormund snorted. "What? You think I went out to piss and forgot to shake?" His eyes ran over the press behind him and he grunted, satisfaction and we're both in the sound. "More than you hoped, less than we need. As it goes. Any trouble?" John asked. Val slipped from the crowd behind Tormund, white fur crossing her shoulders, her pale hair bound up like wreaths. She had a look like winter made flesh, beautiful the way a knife could be beautiful. "Trouble," Tormund said. "The woods are trouble. The dead walk. The others send their cold ahead of them like a hungry dog. Every shadow's a snare. But there are men and women here who have hands and hearts yet. Snow. And they'll listen if there's listening to be done." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You were right to make it before the little lords sent their men. Before some fool with a castle decided to stick his spear where it didn't belong. I brought the ones I could keep from killing each other along the way. The thens came south from the long lake. Whitetree's folk, what's left of them. Some from the frozen shore. A few of the Ice River hands. Don't look at me like that. They've fewer ears than most, but they've 2 good arms apiece." John said nothing at first. He let his gaze pass over the faces, taking in the scar lines, the brittle mouths. The free folk had the way of looking straight at a man, measuring him with their eyes. The men of the watch behind him shifted under that raw regard. The old enmities lay like dry tinder. The storm would find them if he did not give them something else to burn. "Welcome to the wall," he called, so that all of them could hear. "You come to live, you come to fight. Both will be found for you. The watch will see you through the gate, one clan at a time." He'd written the order himself, had it read in the kitchens and the yard and the barracks where it would be grumbled at. "Each clan will lay down its arms at the armory. Each clan will choose a single speaker to sit in council this night. We'll eat together. We'll talk together. We'll fix the terms." Bowen Marsh's breath was white at John's shoulder. "Terms," he repeated, not quite under his breath. "Terms with raiders." "We'll make terms or we'll make graves," John said, low enough that only the men nearest could hear. "Help the armory with the weapons, Bowen. Othel, get men to the new halls. Leathers, see the children into the warm first. The babes especially." Leathers, with his braided beard and broken common tongue, grinned and dipped his head. The former raider moved like a cat among the newcomers, calling in the harsh cadence of the forest. Ghost watched it all with his red eyes half-hooded, not a sound out of him. By dusk the yard was a clatter of mess trenches and the fragrant steam of broth ladled into wooden bowls, The deep pock of bread heels thumped apart and handed on. The rookery was loud with ravens. The leg bones of a mammoth lay near the cook fire like fallen timbers, and one weg one sat on his haunches by them and watched the kitchens as if waiting to be fed like the rest. The giant's face had a child's open solemnity that made him more terrible, not less. When he smiled at the small ones, the children shrank closer to their mothers, and Val said something, quick and soft, until their fear loosened enough that a girl with a runny nose crept near the giant's knee. One lowered a finger as thick as a man's wrist, and the girl stroked it as if it were a shaggy trunk. In the Lord Commander's solar, the heat from the brazier pushed against the draft that wormed in through the stone's seams. Tallow candles clogged the air with their smell. John had laid out a rough map along his tabletop, scratched onto parchment with charcoal and sealed in places with wax. Ed stood with one elbow on a chest as if the furniture might attempt to escape if he did not put his weight to it. Bowen Marsh had brought a ledger with old rents and new tally marks and kept rubbing his thumb along one inkpot's rim like a man worrying a coin. Tormund planted both hands on the table and bent to the map with a scowl. "I see the wall," he said. "Hard to miss. I see the sea. The gift I know. That's where you keep the folk who don't know how to plant. Where do you want us?" "We can't put you all in the same place," John said. "Too big a mouth will starve itself first. Too deep a footprint will give our enemies a single heel to step on." "Enemies," Bowen repeated. "Your enemies, my lord. Be careful whose enemies you choose for us." John ignored him. "Look here," he said, and tapped his finger on the parchment. "There are crofts in the new gift that have been empty 2 lifetimes. Houses fallen, fences rotted. The soil will give back if it's turned. There are holdfast ruins along the White Knife's headwaters, and abandoned steadings east and west of the King's Road. That country is sparse as it stands. The lords of the north haven't kept men there for a long time. The Watch was supposed to protect it and we failed. We don't have men enough. I propose to settle clans in ribbons like so." He ran a line of pebbles along the foot of the wall, close enough to the wall to answer its call, far enough south of the deep shadows that the trees can't spit whites into your cooking fires without warning. Each ribbon with a watch hill and a beacon tower. "A what?" Tormund squinted. "A tall stack of stone on a hill, dry as bone inside. You store firewood. Tar. A ladder. If there's danger, you light it. You light them in a stair, one lighting the next. A chain of bright up the hills. The nearest castle will see and send men." John's finger drifted east, to the symbol for Eastwatch by the sea. The painted sea was black in the flicker of the candlelight. "Here especially, the ice comes by water as much as by wood." Val had been studying him while Tormund studied the map. "You would give us land," she said, as if she were testing a nut for meat. "You would feed our novices in your halls. You would say we are not your enemies." "I would say you have enemies enough beyond the wall," John said. "And what do you ask?" Val asked. John inhaled through his nose. The cold had crusted his nostrils with a soreness he would feel in the night. "3 things," he said. "First, that you hold no slaves. Second, that you raid no more south of the gift. No sheep stolen, no women taken, no burnings. Third, that each clan gives oath to your own gods if you like to come when the wall calls. If the horn sounds 3 and our ravens find you, you come. You bring men and women who can fight. You bring boys with bows. You help us keep the dead dead." Tormund straightened and scratched his beard until ice flakes fell like dandruff. "Slaves are for fools and crows," he said. "We had no use for it north. The raiding," his lips twisted. "Some will choke on that. There are old spears pointed at old doors. But we've been hungry long enough. I'll tell them hunger's a worse enemy than pride. The oath," he rolled a shoulder. "A man may swear anything with his mouth. It's his feet that show what he meant." "We'll take the feet too," John said. "A pledge of spears. Tally if you prefer that word. 10 fighters from each 100 people. 50 from 500. Small clans may join and count as one. Their names in the ledger." He looked to Bowen Marsh, who looked back at him with the miserable face of a man watching his roof catch fire. When we call, the tally comes. Val's mouth curled. Not quite smile and not quite scorn. You'd make us lords with numbers. I'd make you neighbors, John said quietly. The door opened without a knock and Melisandre entered, a spill of red into the room. She looked as if she had come in from a different world. The snow did not stick to her, and the room's cold slid around her and made no mark. The red jewel at her throat glowed steady as a breath held too long. "My lord," she said, inclining her head to John and letting her eyes tilt across the others with kind contempt. "You gather the living where the dead cannot miss them. Wise. King's blood warms the steps of fate." "I've no king's blood," John said. "Every oath is its own kind of blood," Melisandre said, as if that were answer enough. She did not look long at Ghost, but John saw the small tension that ran along the wolf's shoulders when she passed near him. The direwolf's muzzle wrinkled just enough to show a hint of a long tooth. "There is a storm on the sea," she continued. "The birds quarrel over it. And in the flames I saw a wall." She smiled then. "Not this one. A wall of men." "We'll take that too," Tormund said. "Men walls better than ice, if the men are thick enough." Bowen closed his ledger. "You'd settle them on Brandon's gift," he said to John in a tone so mild it felt like a cold blade. "On Stark lands, you'd set watchtowers where there were none. You'd swear them to fight, as if the watch were a lord. We have no right to do these things. We have no right to live either," Ed said in his dry sing-song. "Yet here we stand, and it seems a terrible bother to die this week." "Stark lands were given to the Watch to keep and to use," John said. "They have lain idle while the Watch starved. The new gift was the Watch's to cultivate. We failed. If I had enough men to plow every inch, I'd plow it." His gaze held Bowen's. "I do not. I have wildlings. They will plow their own, and they'll plant ash on their watch hills and keep wood dry and ready. When the beacons go, the lords that do hold lands south will be grateful or they'll be dead. Either way, their gratitude won't buy us much." Bowen's eyes were wet. They always seemed wet lately. "You were not chosen to be lord, my lord. You were chosen to be Lord Commander." "And I am," John said. "Commanding is what this is." They spoke until the brazier went down to an orange memory of heat and the candles became filaments. They spoke of iron to be forged, of roofs to be mended, of seed to be bargained for from White Harbor and Barrowton and the farms along the Bar Roland's long roads, of tools to be tallied, of the rules of the armory, of who among the free folk would submit to trial by lord and who would demand a trial by combat beneath a heart tree's eye. Tormund said the clans would not bend knee to any except their own speakers, and John said a man might kneel to a fact if he would not kneel to a lord. They argued over water rights as if it were summer. Val asked if the women would be counted separate in fighting, and John said yes, any who could stand a spear and shoot a bow. When Tormund laughed and said the Southrons would piss their wool when they saw women in the line, John did not disagree. In the end, there were words on parchment. The Watch's ink froze in the quill as often as not, and Ed had to warm it in his palms and the sweep of his breath. Tormund pressed a thumb onto a blob of wax, then scarred his knuckle with his knife and smeared the blood over his print. "For blood and for breath," he said, in a ritual John had heard before among the wildlings and never before from Tormund's mouth. Val took the knife without looking at Tormund and cut her palm with neatness. "For daughters," she said. Bowen did not offer his blood. He pressed the Watch's seal, the raven in hand enclosed by the wall's stylized curve, into the wax with a dignity that made even Tormund quieter than he wished to be. When it was done, John stepped out into the cold night. The stars gathered like salt thrown on black velvet. Ghost's breath rose and vanished. Along the yards the fires were islands of yellow. A child cried and was hushed. A woman laughed too sharply and then did not laugh again. The beak and black eye of a raven watched him from the rookery's edge, cocking and cocking its head as if the bird had a sore neck. John leaned his forehead against the ice-slick wall until the cold bled some of the heat from his skull. "You put your hand in the bear's mouth," Ed said behind him. "I don't know bears. They all look like meat with teeth to me." If it eats you, I can't eat it after. Rotten luck. We're all in a bear's mouth, John said. I'm only trying to pry the jaws a little. He turned his face to the wind, and the wind, scented of pine and smoke, reached back at him like a hand. The next days were a pageant of difficult things. The armory filled like a flooded hollow. Spears laid in bundles like bundled wheat, crude axes and staghorn blades, stone knives, bows strung and unstrung and restrung, while the bowyers among the free folk argued with Donal Noy's successors about wood and glue as if marriages could be fixed with such talk. Children were given to the kitchens and set to shelling hard beans with purple fingers. Ghost kept to John's heels or wandered and returned from the shadows with snow on his nose. Tormund's laughter rode the yards, big as ever but with a raw edge in it. He clapped fighters on their backs and cuffed boys and grinned in Val's direction and slept hardly at all. They opened the tunnels beneath the gate one after another and sent clans south in tranches. Every time the gate ground up, John's heart clenched as if some part of him feared it would not close again. The track that went south from Castle Black had been trodden some since autumn, but not like this. Now it became a churned brown gash in the snow, a scar that led down across the low rolls and vanished into stands of old birch along the first of the little creeks. Men with spades went ahead to dig out the drifts and to test the ice of crossings. Women drove sleds with goods roped down like captured animals. A giant's foot sank to his shin and groaned when he pulled it free, and one blinked as if composing a tale for another giant far off. At one crossing near a ruined tumble-down holdfast, the first fight almost undid the whole. A crofter whose patch had stood empty 2 winters came back and found a then family already within his half-walls, their fire in his old hearth and their meat spit on his old spit. The crofter's wife wept. The crofter himself brandished a mattock and mouthed the word thief as if it were a prayer and he a zealot. The then man held up his hands and said words that meant nothing to the crofter and everything to his own. Boy from the thens not yet old enough for a blade shouted and ran at the crofter, and the crofter swung with the iron head of the mattock, and the boy fell and bled in the snow. The crofter stood like a man who had wedged his foot into a fissure and felt the ice begin to move. His wife screamed into her shawl. The then would have taken the crofter's head if Tormund had not caught his arm in a grip that creaked the bone. John arrived to find the dead boy being laid on a sled with care, and the crofter kneeling in the snow with his hands bound and his eyes wide and watery, the mattock as far away from him as if it had crawled. Took an hour to get words through the thick ice of anger. The thens wanted a blood price and a blood day. The crofter claimed he had swung to defend what was his, and in the depths of his terror there was a sting of affront that John saw and recognized in himself. It ended at the half-walls. John stood the then and the crofter opposite one another and had the women stand too. The then's wife with her face set as a carved eel and the crofter's wife with her mouth clamped until she trembled. "This is the gift," John said. "The watch keeps it in trust and in poverty. The tallies would hold or they would crack here." The crofter moaned when he understood. He looked to his wife, who was as pale as old milk and wouldn't look back. In the end he set his mattock on the low wall and laid his fingers on the stone and made a sound like a man passing a stone in his bowels and brought the mattock down. The blade took 2 fingers in a wet red lump that jumped like frogs in the snow. He swayed and would have fallen if Ed had not caught his arm and held him. The then woman did not smile, but something relaxed in her eyes. The boy's body went south with the sled and a small guard of men walked with it like a procession. That afternoon, the thens cut enclosures from the old stones and set their posts, and the crofter and his wife took the abandoned croft half a mile east where there was a creek and a dead apple tree. They kept entirely to themselves for a week, and then, one morning, the crofter's wife walked to the then house with a pair of knitted mitts and left them on the doorstep without knocking. Little by little houses rose out of ruin. A floor scraped clean, a truss hauled up, a chimney heaved stone by stone, smoke telling its own story. Beacon hills were chosen where the land allowed and piles of wood were kept dry under hastily shingled caps. A watchtower rose above a hill that once had only sheep, rough stone from a tumble of ancient fence, and it looked to John like a thumb pushed up in stubbornness. With settlement came the other things men bring with them. Quarrels over a well, a woman who walked where she pleased and a man who thought no one should, a ravening dog killed when it would not leave off worrying a boy's arm. John was called to some of these matters, and to others he sent leathers with a rope and a warning. Tormund settled more with his voice than his hands, and Val scorned the foolish and the lazy alike until even Ed said he'd never seen a woman make men move with only a tongue and two eyes. The worst of the watch spat when the free folk passed, or muttered into their food. A few asked for water lit with cold blue light in his memory, and screams hung thinner than water. Tell Cotter Pike to keep his men tight, light his beach. Ons twice in the night and watch for answer. I'll send men. You'll send wildlings, Bowen said. You'll send raiders to guard our coasts. I'll send fighters who know the smell of the dead, John said. If we have to choose between a man who raided last year and a thing that will raid forever, I choose the man. He looked to Ed. Tallies from Tormund's lists. 200 spears. Then's if they'll come, and the woods folk from Whitetree. Leathers and 5 of ours who have seen Hardhome and remember it. He breathed once, deeply. I'll go. He went. By the time they reached Eastwatch, the sea was a dark iron plate under a sky that had forgotten blue. Cotter Pike met him at the gate with eyes that had not slept in days and a beard that had 3 different kinds of ice set into it like stones. His smile looked like a cut. You bring me wolves dressed like sheep, he said, nodding at the ranks strung out behind John. I suppose I have to say thank you or you'll write to your mother. Write to the ravens, John said. They're the only mothers we have. Cotter shook his head. The worst part is that you might be right. He took John up to the sea tower where the wind lived. From there the coast curled away, a white line where the waves gnawed at the shore. In the far distance, a low long smoke smudged the horizon where Hardwater would be. They swear they hear singing, Cotter said. But when a man thinks the sea sings to him, he's either drunk or dead. There's ice on the pebbles some nights even when the wind spins south. Birds won't set on the rocks there. We scouted at dawn. No tracks, no gulls. They went in 2 columns along the frozen beach, boots slipping and crunching, the sound of the sea reshaping around the stones louder than any drums. The first huts came into view like hunched shoulders in the snow. One had collapsed. Another had burned to black ribs. A third sat pristine, door closed, smoke smell faint but distinct. Leathers sniffed the air and spat. They found the first body behind the hut. In the shallow scoop a fisherman had dug for gut and offal. The dead man lay curled like a child, his face a ruin of frost burns and blue glass eyes. A boy bent to him and Val's voice cut across the yard like a thrown blade. Don't touch him. She drew her knife and glanced at John. He nodded. She slit the dead man's head from ear to ear and laid it open so that the thin black blood leaked down into the pit like oil. Not with ash, she said. There's too much water here. The water loves them. The second dead thing came at them out of the smoke in the hut, quiet as breath. A woman with her hair burned to stiff char and her fingers like reef stones. She went for John's throat, and the only reason he lived was that ghost moved first. The dire wolf hit the dead woman and drove her into the muck, his jaws closing on her arm and breaking it like twigs. John's sword felt light in his hand when he brought it down. The arm came away and flopped like a fish, and the woman twisted and reached for his face with her other hand and made a sound like steam. He stepped back and thrust, and the blade's black ripples slid between her ribs. Blue crystals dusted the air and melted as if ashamed of themselves, and she lay broken. When she did not stop moving, Val's knife kissed her throat as it had kissed the first. They lit pyres on the beach with oil Cotter Pike had been hoarding for months. The oil stank sweet as a rotted orchard. Smoke made a black that the wind could not quite tear away. On the 3rd day, when they thought they had burned all pieces and broken every finger bone they could find, a cluster of ice at the edge of the surf drew in on itself, rose and took steps, then shot it with black glass arrowheads until it came apart like a badly built sandman. And the pieces bled nothing and melted nothing and were carried away like lies by the waves. By the end of the week at Eastwatch, John stopped hearing the sea as one sound. He heard it as 1,000 small sounds composed of their own smallness, and each was a prodding finger. They set a beacon on the tallest of the broken teeth of rock where the tide strode in like a tyrant, and by miracle the beacon stayed dry under its shell. John slept in 3 snatches where sleep took him, and each time woke with the taste of rust in his mouth and ghost's warmth at his ankles. On the last night, a harp began to play in his dream, and he woke to the real thing without a gap. A man sat in a corner of the watch hall with a harp on his knee, plucking strings as if doing a petty penance. He had the look of the north about him, gray eyes and wind's marks at the corners of his mouth, a big glove hanging from his belt like a second hand. John sat and did not speak until the man had finished the tune. "You're far from where you should be," the harper said at last, "and closer than you think." "I'm exactly where I should be," John said, "and nowhere near where I want." He smiled despite himself. "Who are you?" "An old song in a new house," the man said. "It's a bitter air for singing. I'd be better off in a hall south of Deepwood with braziers and girls who enjoy singing more than the man who sings." "You don't play like a man who enjoys people," John said. "Then my mother was right," the man said, and plucked a string. "They say the Lord Commander makes treaties now, that he settles raiders like newborn lambs on stark lands." "Not lambs," John said. "Wolves, perhaps, or goats." "Goats get hungry," the man said. "Goats eat what's meant for others." "Better a goat than a dead thing," John said. "I can reason with a goat. It may but me. It may eat my rope. It won't try to suck the heat from my eyes." "You've a black kind of humor for a man so young." The harper stood, the harp against his side. "I'll take my harp to White Harbor when the snow allows. Songs go faster than men, but men pay better than winter. Tell Wyman Manderley that the watch means to keep the G. Ift," John said. "Tell him we've set beacons as far as Hardwater, and if he lights them from his walls in the south, we'll light them in the north and see if the night can be made to think." "I'll tell him a crow wants to weave a net of fire," the harper said. "He'll like that, the old whale." He tipped the harp by way of bow and went out into the cold, the song he had not finished trailing after him like a scarf. When John returned to Castle Black, the watch's ravens booed to one another as if gossiping about his beard. The yards were calmer than he had feared, rowdier than he had hoped. Bowen presented him with a stack of complaints heavier than any pack, and among them John found a single folded square that had been thrust under the door of his solar by a hand unwilling to be seen. The words were clumsy, the ink thin and gritty. It read, "They have taken Martin's girl. She went to feed the goats at dawn and never came back. A hunter was seen with her hair tie in his belt. If you care about the men who bleed black, you will return her. If you do not, I will make a fire so bright you'll see it from your window. Winter makes boys into men and men into kindling." John felt the familiar pull in him, the draw of anger like a tide, the heavier draw of fatigue. He sent for Martin and the hunter both. He found Martin to be a shrunken man with a mouth like a slit and a tiredness that had turned mean. The hunter was younger than John expected, long-limbed, his hair in a braid that hung to his chest. He wore a little brief bone rune at his throat and watched everyone as if they were all animals he might want to stalk later. She had a goat's stubborn set to her jaw and a bruise flowering high on one cheekbone like an ill-placed bit of paint. She stood before John with her chin up and did not look at Martin. "I'm called Elia," she said. "Not Martin's girl, though I was born to his wife. I went with rig of my own will, and when my father came after us with a stick, I hit him with a stone. If that makes me a bad daughter, then fine." Martin made a sound like a kettle. "She's been turned by that witch," he spat, meaning Val, who had spoken with Elia twice in the yard. "They do something to the girls. They make them." "We talk," Val said. She was in the doorway now too, as if the day had agreed to deliver all its difficulties in one bundle. "We show them knives and how to skin hares. They learn they've hands." John rubbed 2 fingers along the bridge of his nose until stars danced. "Elia," he said, "how old are you?" 18, she said. Martin made another kettle noise that did not contradict her. "Did you go with rig freely?" John asked, keeping his voice still. "Yes." She did not glance at the hunter or at anyone else. "He said he'd build me a house and that I could hunt and that if I tired of him I could leave. Martin told me all my life that no man would ever have me because my hips are too narrow and my face too plain and my tongue too sharp. This face is good enough for what I need. I'd like to try if my hips are enough for a baby without hearing him tell me every day they aren't. Martin's face worked. He had the look of a man whose life had been held together by a twine of small insults, each tied to the other, enough to make a net, and now someone had yanked out a knot and the whole net had fallen. "She's mine," he said. It was not angry now. It was broken. "No person is yours," Val said, and her voice had iron enough in it to make John feel the heat from the brazier, though he was 3 steps away. "Martin," John said, "your daughter is of an age to go where she will. Rig, if you take her knowing that if you strike her or hold her when she wants to go, I'll see you walking my yard with blood on your back. Elia, if you go knowing I'll not shield you from your choice. If you want to come back later, you may, but your father will have to be told, and you will have to say the words to his face." She looked at Martin then for the first time, and her jaw softened and then said again, "I'll say them now," she said, and did. Martin wept without sound while she spoke, and when it was done he left the room without looking at anyone at all. "Best we can hope," Ed said after. "Some people want justice like milk, sweet and easy to swallow. It's really more like bones. They stick, they break teeth." 2 nights later, a watch hill west of the King's Road sent a stammering beacon into the dark that looked to John like a hand flapping in distress. The next hill took the light. The third sputtered and died, and in dying told the story. The wood was wet, the people green, the fear great. John stood in the yard in nothing but shirt and breeches, the cold gumming to his skin, and felt a strange joy open in him like a wound when the 4th hill flared. Flame ran east. They found the village they would later call Hearthstone, because there was nothing left but places where hearths had sat. In the morning, smoke smearing the air and turning the snow gray where it had not been turned black. Houses had fallen inward like men too drunk to extol their own folly. The first man they found alive had burned his hands to claws pulling his child from a door that had jammed. He wept when he saw John and tried to kneel and simply sank into the soot. Rig the hunter had a gash across his forehead that ran to the thin hairline and looked like a second grin. Elia stood beside him with soot on her cheeks and a sack over her shoulder stuffed with what looked like bread and 2 bent spoons. One stood in the middle of the village like a tree that had Desi, dead to move, turning to look toward the trees, toward the hills, toward the sky, never still. He had scars now along his arm where he'd reached into burning thatch to pull out a goat, and the goat had objected. "Dead?" John asked the first man who seemed able to speak. "They came in the wind," he said, as if finishing an old song. "I never saw men, only the cold. The ducks on the pond froze standing up." His eyes drifted. "We kept a lantern by the door," he said. "There are all sorts of advice about lanterns, and I can't recall a one of them. We lit it. The flame ran out of the glass, my lord. It ran like it had legs. The dead things had not come in numbers. That made it worse to John's mind. A handful of whites could burn a village as well as 200 if the men within could not think. The bones they found they cut, as Val had taught them, and burned after burning. The survivors they sent down the road beneath a guard. The free folk stood in the char and ash and did not complain. He saw something in their faces that he could not name. It was not pride. It was not anger. It had the patience of uncomfortable shoes. When the sun lowered, John stood where the watch hill had burned and looked north. The wind had the taste of brass. He felt the wall at his back and thought of the night he had first climbed it as a boy in a man's clothes. He thought of Ygritte, and the weight of her in his arms when the world had gone red and black. The memory came on him like a wave. Her hair, the flakes caught in it. The exact shape her mouth had made when she told him something he could not accept. The tiny smell of grass blood when an arrow strikes. He had learned the lesson too late then, and would not again. The living required more stubbornness than the dead. It took another fortnight for the first Northern Lord to answer the word he had sent. Wyman Manderley did not come himself, and that was good. White Harbor would go colder if its whale rose. He sent a nephew instead, a man with a face like a slab of ice and manners just warm enough to be called manners. Sir Willis Manderley rode into Castle Black with 20 men and 3 wagons, and a letter sealed with a wolf and a merman clasped together as if to show they could embrace without drowning one another. The letter said what John expected it to say, that the watch's duties were ancient and honored, and the Manderleys would not gainsay any effort in good faith to feed men who stood between them and devils. It said, too, what he had hoped it would, that White Harbor would sell seed and salt fish on fair terms, that a number of oxen might be lent at small fee to break hard ground, and that men might be spared to instruct in plowing for a few weeks when the earth gave a little. The word neighbors did not appear. The word wildling did not appear either. The letter called them those people every time it had to. Val said, "Better than nothing." Tormund said, "Better than the back of a hand," which was what it would have been last winter. John sent ravens thanking and asking more and offering accountings of the tallies in case the word sworn had to be shown a weight. In the quiet between storms, a thing happened that John had expected and yet not prepared for. He was in the yard speaking with Othel Yarwick about the stones that had been dragged to build the first tower when a horn sounded once from the wall. Once for rangers returning. No one was due. John looked up and saw the black specks on the ice, a dozen men moving slow, and thought of all the things that might wear the shape of men when they were not men. His stomach drew tight. Ghost pricked his ears and cocked his head. The men came down like exhausted flies. The first through the gate had a face he knew and a wound that made John's heart misstep. The face was Bowen Marsh's most loyal retainer, Blaine, with blood black on his hip where a spear had grazed and turned ugly. The second was a boy not much more than 15. The third was a man with his left hand gone at the wrist, the sleeve frozen and browned. They all looked the same. Eyes wide as saucers, mouths tight. The trembling that comes after fear has been spent. "It was not far," Blaine said. "Near the old oak stand along the New Gift." He swallowed. "One of our patrols found a dead man in a drift and heard something moving where there should be no movement. We thought a wolf. We thought a bear. We thought too many things and none of them right enough." "What was it?" John asked, though his bones already knew. "The air," Blaine said simply. "It tore at our throats. When we breathed it, it was as if we were swallowing knives. Then we saw them." He shut his eyes and opened them. It was brave, John thought, to make the effort. Not many, 3 to start, blue like cornflowers in summer. They moved as if there were no ground under them. Simon hit one with steel and the steel slid off like water, except the sword was colder after. "John, I struck one with the butt of my spear and my fingers went numb where they touched wood. It smiled at me. 'Do you have any dragonglass?' John asked. He already knew the answer. Blaine shook his head. "Valyrian." Leathers held out a handful of arrowheads he'd taken to carrying like some men carry dice. He shook his head too. Othel coughed. "I'll get the glass," he said. John put a hand on Blaine's shoulder. He did it in full view of the yard so that every man and woman could see the motion. "You did rightly to come back," he said. "We need to count them. We can't make spears from pride." He raised his voice. "Hear me. This is the word I've kept to myself because I never thought to like the sound of it. We're lighting our own beacons this night, and not for any southern lord. We'll light from Queen's Crown to the Bay of Seals and from there to the Shadow Tower. Send the runners. Leathers, go to the armory. I'll send riders to the first 3 hills and plant men there to show them how to keep teach. Wood from soaking up the snow." "What of me?" Tormund asked. He had come from nowhere by the look of it, but John knew that men like Tormund were nowhere only until you looked. "I want you at the hill above the lonely birch stand the Southron map calls Weeping Wold," John said. "I want you there with 50. The others don't come with any man's name in their mouths, but they do come where hunger is. That hill is a belly in winter." He met Tormund's eyes. "I trust you," he said into that place where the choice lay open. Tormund scratched his beard and grinned, and this time the grin had nothing raw in it. "When a crow says he trusts a man," he said, "the man has no choice but to trust himself right back." He clapped Blaine once on the shoulder, so hard that Blaine stumbled, and left the yard with a stride like a stump cutting. They lit the beacons in a string of light that made John's chest ache. He stood on the tower above the yard and watched them flower to life one by one under a sky that had gone so cold it had grown luminous. Flame along the ridgeline, flame along the folds. A sound moved through the night that was not the wind. It was a sound like breath taken in by a giant and held. It made the hair on John's forearms rise inside his sleeves. The first attack came before dawn. The hill that the old maps called Long Barrow humped up out of the snow like a buried beast, and the beacon there gout and then flared with a steadiness that spoke of men who had learned something. The men on the hill stopped cheering when the flame hissed, and a shape drifted toward them over the snow like a part of the sky fallen. The men broke. Some ran for the trees and struck them and fell. Some curled in the snow as if sleep might save them. A woman with a pitch torch made a lunge as if to set fire to the air itself. John saw it all in glimpses as his horse pounded and Ghost flowed beside him like a thought. The others were 3 at Long Barrow and 5 by the time John reached the slope. Whites rose where the cold told them to. The cold used the dead as a mouth uses a tongue. "Glass!" John bellowed, and a boy whose name John had never learned threw him a handful of arrowheads with hands already going white. John fitted one into a socket at the end of a spear shaft and hurled the spear the way he had practiced and practiced. It struck another high in the chest and made a sound like a glass filled to the brim shattering in a man's ear. Blue shards hung in the air and then were not. The creature was gone as if it had never been. He'd never grown used to the way their color was simply removed from the world. Another turned its head and regarded him. The face had planes like a beautiful carving. It had eyes that were not the color of anything a man could wear. Smiled. John heard the smile in his blood. He did not wait. He drew Longclaw and felt the old familiar weight take up the place above his heart. The sword had cut men and ghosts. It had cut lies and a woman's hair. It would cut this too. He slid forward through snow that tried to hold his legs and slashed at the creature's reaching arm. The blade passed, and the arm came apart like a frost-struck branch. The creature's smile died like a lamp pinched. John took the head off with the backswing and long blue crystals sprayed the air and tinkled. They fell at his feet like 1,000 little lies. He breathed in, tasted something like metal and old summer, breathed out fog like a beast. "Keep the light!" he heard Ed shouting hoarsely. "Keep the light along the wood. Leave the wet wood. You'll only make sadness with it." He saw Val at the crest of the barrow with her hair blown back like a flag, arrow knocked, expression as sharp as an icicle. He saw Tormund downslope, 2 steps ahead of a white whose chest was a broken cage, swinging an axe that looked like a toy against a tree trunk in his hands. He saw Blaine take a spear meant for a boy and fall with it and rise again with a laugh like a cracked drum. He saw one, enormous and impossible, plod up the side of the hill through drifts that came to a man's waist and thrust a tree trunk into the face of another so hard that the trunk turned to a spray of needles and the creature went to shards. The fight lasted as long as a man can hold his breath and as short. When it was done there were dead to cut and burn and men to gather and women to bind and fires. "We are no longer the Watch. We are exactly the Watch," John said. "We watch the realms of me. And they are men, Bowen. When the dead come, and they are coming, the difference between a man you hate and a man you love is less than the difference between either and nothing." Bowen's throat worked. "A man you hate carries a knife for your back," he said and stepped forward. He was not quick. John saw the look in his eyes before his hand moved. John could have moved. He did not for the time it took to know that he could. In that heartbeat, Tormund stepped from the side as if he had been waiting in exactly that angle, exactly that place, and caught Bowen's wrist like a bear pulling a branch. The knife made a little arc and clattered in the snow. Bowen cried out once and sank to his knees. "You want to fight?" Tormund asked with incredulous cheer. "Fight the things with blue eyes. Leave this boy alone." Bowen's face went old. He closed his eyes. "I've given my life to the Watch," he said. "And so have I," John said quietly. He bent and picked up the knife. It looked like any kitchen knife, thin, red-rusted near the hilt. "From this day I'll ask this of every man here. If your anger is bigger than your oath, leave. Go to the Shadow Tower. Go to Eastwatch. Go back to your mother's hut and let her sew you to her skirts. If you stay, you'll keep the beacons burning and you'll keep your knife for the cold things." He looked at Bowen and thought of all the slights the man had endured, the injuries that had seemed like insults, the tradition that had kept him upright. "Bowen, I would rather have your anger at my side than your knife at my back." A sound moved through the yard, something like a sigh but larger. Men who had been ready to be brave looked at their boots. Bowen did not accept John's hand to rise. He pressed his own on his knee and stood with a grunt. Tears ran to the corners of his mouth. He did not wipe them away. "You make it very hard to do what I think I must," he said in a voice that went truer than John had ever heard it. "Good," Ed said. "Do what you must by halves. See how you like it." The treaty did not end wars that had lasted lifetimes, but it bent them, and bending was enough. Tormund took his 50 to Weeping Wold and kept a fire that did not go out until the next snowfall. Val's archers began to range along the beacons as if practicing a game no one had named. Elia learned to track hair in frost and to lay snares with hands that stopped shaking after a week. Martin stopped drinking long enough to fix the hinge on his door. Wyman Manderley's nephew sent more oxen than John had asked and a note made of better paper than any that had sat on John's table yet. And the ink made neat lines that said that the merman and the wolf had always known one another in water deeper than any man could swim. In late afternoon one day, the sun dropped like a coin into cloud and everything went a strange pearlescent gray. Val stood on the wall beside John with her hands on its ice and her hair wound tight. "You make them swear like Southrons," she said. "I let them swear like themselves," John said. "Blood on wax, thumb on parchment, oath in the heart." She nodded. Her breath went in and out and made small clouds. "Some will break. You know that. Some of ours will too," John said. "All people break," Val said in the voice of a woman who had never broken and did not plan to. "But if there's a place they'd rather not break, they stand there." She tipped her head toward the lights burning along the low hills south of the wall. The beacons looked small and stubborn. "I don't love you for doing it," she added. "I don't need love for it," John said. He thought of the first time he'd truly seen the free folk as anything but raiders. He thought of a girl with red hair and a truth he had not wanted. He thought of his father who was not his father and a name he had never claimed. "I need men to live. Women, children, giants." Val's mouth quirked. "You'll never be a king." "I never asked to be one," John said. The wind climbed its own stairs along the ice and made the sound that the wind always made there. "I think of old Brandon and his wall," he said after a time. "Whatever he was, however he did it, the truth is the same. He put his strength into a thing that could hold when he could not. The rest is story. If this treaty holds after me, I care about the hold and not who is told he made it." "A wall of men," Melisandre had said. He could not see her in his mind without also feeling the heat she carried in with her. Impossible heat in a place where heat was an insult to the air. Maybe she had seen something. It turned a cry into a horn blast and a horn blast into a fire and AF. Ire into a thin line visible from far away. When they told the story later, the way men will if they survive long enough to lie about how close they were to dying. Some said the day Jon Snow brokered a treaty with the Free Folk was the day the North became a different kind of country, one that knew a new word for itself, a word with more teeth and less pride. Some said the day it became a different country was the night the hill called Long Barrow burned blue without dying and then burned red again. Some said there was no day at all. There were only small decisions made while men were cold and hungry and scared, and the sky was the color of old milk. Jon did not say. He did not weigh words that way. He counted spears and watched the fires and listened to the rumble the wind made when it went hunting along the wall. If words mattered, they would matter later. If pride mattered, it had already died and did not mind. In the spring, if it came, the gift would be a patchwork of new hands and old lines. There would be children born who would never have heard the word wildling except as a story. There would be graves with names carved in runes and in letters both, the two scripts touching like two people sleeping in a narrow bed. In summer, if it came, the Watch Hills would stand as if they had been there always, and the token gleam of tarred wood within them would throw a high smell on still days. In winter, and winter was now, the beacons burned, and the treaty held, and the dead tested those places and sometimes broke against them and sometimes slid through like teeth through fat. The living adjusted. They adjusted or they burned. They adjusted or they died. On a night like the first night, under a sky as stingy and beautiful, John stood again at the top of the wall with Ghost at his side and a cold that had learned his name. Below, a tide of torchlight moved along the base of the ice and spread to the right and left as messengers came in and went out and the small trades of living were arranged. He felt the old fear and the new certainty both. He thought of the map and of pebbles set where hills stood and of wax with thumbprints and blood. He thought of a giant's careful smile and a girl's stubborn jaw, of a crofter's 2 missing fingers and a goat with its own ideas. He thought of the world beyond the wall and knew, as he had known for months, that the word beyond had just bent a little, as all words bend when they have to. The dire wolf put his weight against John's thigh and John put his hand into Ghost's coat and let the cold eat what it could. Somewhere far along the line of the Watch Hills, a beacon stuttered and then steadied. From Eastwatch, if a man had good eyes that night, he could have seen 4 hills burning faintly at once. From the Shadow Tower, if another man had eyes possibly better, he could have seen 3 more. Between them, across land that had been no man's and was now everyone's and no one's, a new line took shape stubbornly. Below the wall, in a low hall where chairs had been dragged and mismatched and where the smells of smoke and boiled meat and damp wool fought one another and none won, a parchment lay with names and marks and stains. The wax had the shape of a raven's beak pressed into it. Someone had set a bowl of fat above it to keep the page from curling in the cold. The fat would congeal by morning. The page would hold its shape for years if no one ate the fat, which they would. But there would be copies. Ed had a steady hand when the ink warmed, and the true copy was alive, walking and cursing and grinning and throwing wood on fires and lifting babies to see their first light and setting coals at night to make morning easier for the next woman. The true copy breathed. John stood, feeling the ice under him with the soles of his boots like a man feeling his own teeth with his tongue, and watched the fires hold their line. "If I live," he said, not to anyone and to everyone, "it will be because you did. If you live, it will be because we did." Ghost's ears twitched as if at a lie and then lay quiet. The night did not answer. It did not need to. When the wind came harder, the line of beacons did not waver. The snow made its slow, careful fall. In the haunted forest, things that hated light seethed and waited, and in the huts of the gift a child woke and slipped out from under a fir to watch for the first time the leaning, stubborn lights on the hills, and did not know that a treaty had been made for her eyes to have that sight alive in them. A man whose fingers had been cut tried to tie a knot with what remained and cursed and sighed and then, careful as a cat, managed it. A woman with a braid bound her mouth tight against what she would have shouted in victory and waited another day to speak more quietly. A giant dreamed a dream with sheep in it and woke laughing and made everyone else in the hut sit up with their hair sticking out. A man who had wept plotted how to make his tears useful. Time would count all these things and call them one. John did not argue with time. He argued with the cold and the dead and men's worst habits. He had set a thing in motion and it would grind him as easily as it would grind his enemies if his hand slipped. He did not let his hand slip. He kept it steady on the one thing he could hold, the notion that men together could be a wall. This, more than any ice, was what he would leave behind whether he died soon or late. Whether he was Lord Commander until his hair went white and his scars folded into his skin and his sword went to a boy whose name he would learn only to forget, or whether a knife found him in a yard one night when the beacons burned slower and his friends were warming their hands. He had made a shape in the world. It would take a while to learn if it lasted. The wall of men did not shimmer like ice or catch the sun. It did not make travelers draw breath at its sight. It looked like men walking and women setting down baskets and children dragging sticks across the ground until they were straight. It looked like watch fires that were never exactly in a straight line but tried anyway. It looked like a pact. It looked like stubbornness. Snow bit his face. Ghost sneezed. John smiled a little. "That's well enough," he said, and in the night no one answered, and that was well enough too. He stood and he watched, and beneath him the living he had bound together with oaths and the promise of land, and the threat and comfort of shared terror, moved and rose and lay down and rose again, while along the hills the line of small, bright tongues never quite went out.